and welcome back to Lisa's Stamp Studio. My card today is going to be focusing on heat embossing, and I'm going to be teaching you some blending techniques using the alcohol-based markers with the embossing combination. But the star of the show is going to be a splatter technique that we're going to emboss. Here's a quick look at the card we're going to be creating together today. Those beautiful speckles are easy to create, and it's a great way to fill up some space on your card. If this is your first time visiting my YouTube channel, I would love to have you subscribe. Click on the subscribe button down below, and right next to it, there's a small bell icon. If you click on that, you'll receive notifications when I'm live here on YouTube, as well as when I upload a new video. Let's head over to the stamp table, and let's get started on today's card. Here's a close-up of the card we're going to be creating. Isn't that gold shimmer beautiful? I'm going to be sharing an important tip today about coloring in heat embossed images when you're using alcohol-based markers. I don't know if you can tell, but those speckles on this background are super easy to create, and I'm going to teach you a splatter technique to do that. Let's start with the focal point, and we are going to be doing quite a bit of heat embossing today, and the secret to a really great embossed image is using the embossing buddy. There's an anti-static powder inside this bag that will tell the embossing powder not to stick where there is an ink, which will help repel small flecks around detailed images and greetings. I've got my Versamark ink pad here, and I've pulled out this beautiful holly image from the stamp set called Christmas Gleaming. You'll find this product in the current holiday catalog with Stampin' Up. Now, if you don't already have a demonstrator and you're interested in receiving a complimentary copy of the holiday catalog and or the annual catalog, head over to lisastampstudio.com and click on Contact Me, and I'll be happy to send you one. I'm going to ink up that holly image in the Versamark ink, and I'm going to stamp that here on my scrap thick Whisper White cardstock. You're going to want to make sure that you have your embossing powder nearby and ready to go. I'm going to cover it generously with embossing powder. That excess powder is going to go right here inside the coffee filter, which is going to allow me to funnel it back inside the jar, so there's little to no waste. I've got my heat tool here. I'll go ahead and turn that on. You'll notice that the tip is encased, which will help maintain the heat of the gun, which is especially great when you're doing repeated images. I'm going to recommend that you start in one area at a time. Allow the paper and the powder to conduct the heat. This way you're able to make sure that that powder turns to a beautiful foil, shiny finish. By skipping around, you risk missing an area, and if you do miss turning that powder into the actual heat embossed image itself, it will literally wipe right off. And you can see how quickly that was able to be achieved. I'm going to set that aside to cool for just a second, and I'm going to come over now to a piece of Mossy Meadow cardstock. Now you might notice that this has already been die cut, and I used the rectangle stitched dies. I love the cascading sizes. They all have a very fun, trendy stitched border. I've got a small piece here. That's all we're going to need to house our greeting. And just like we've done before, I'm going to rub the embossing buddy over here on the left side, which is where I'm going to put my greeting. Making sure that my embossing powder, once again, is nearby. I'm going back to my Versamark ink, and I'm inking up the words, "Deck the halls with boughs of holly." That is also part of this exact same stamp set, and that's going to go here on the left side. I'll come right over my coffee filter once again, generously cover that. We're back here to the heat tool, and just like we did with the holly, I want you to concentrate on one area at a time. Now keep in mind that the gun is still warm since we just used it on the previous image, so you're going to notice that it's going to go a lot quicker. Another important tip is take your time and tip the paper and make sure that there's no leftover powder that has not been heat set. We're going to set this aside for right now, and we're going to come back to our embossed holly image. This is where we're going to be using the alcohol-based Stampin' Blends markers. Now, because they're alcohol-based, if you are not careful to avoid those heat embossed lines here, especially these veins, the color will actually cover it. I'm using the Mossy Meadow combination, which is the light and the dark. The great thing about these alcohol-based markers is if you choose to use them individually just as markers to color, you're going to notice that the coverage is flawless. It doesn't leave those dye-based striped lines behind like a regular marker would. I'm going to start with the thicker end of my marker, designated here by the line. You'll see this is the thinner one. I'm going to come in and add just a little bit of detail inside those veins, just so we have a little bit of definition when we go to color in this holly. I'm going to switch over now to the lighter shade of the Mossy Meadow. And what I'm going to be doing is concentrating by pulling that dark area into the light area that I'm spreading. What I'm looking to do is to create a beautiful graduation of color instead of those harsh lines. So I'm going to go over all these areas, and you're going to notice that I'm very careful to avoid those embossed veins here, because again, if I'm not, I can actually color them green, and I want to make sure that those gold areas are going to stay predominant inside the leaves. One thing that's very important is you're going to want to allow the alcohol from this marker to evaporate to become more of its true color. I'm going to work now with the combination of the cherry cobbler. Again, I'm going to use my darkest color first, and this time I'm going to use the smaller tip. Now I'm going to add a little color here around the center of my berry. Again, I'm avoiding that center dot that was embossed. Using the lighter shade now, I'm going to go in and fill the other areas, very much like what we did with the leaves. Again, I'm going to avoid those embossed areas, especially in the center. There are not coordinating dies for this image, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that out with my scissors. Just to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to cut this paper down, and I want to give you some tips when you use your scissors to cut out your images. This is better known as fussy cutting. Make sure you leave a little bit of that cardstock around your stamped or embossed images. That will help to make sure that you don't distort the image, because if we cut too close, it's really easy to cut inside those lines. So I'm going to repeat this process all the way around the perimeter of this image. Now that that's finished, let's go ahead and work on that splatter technique. I've got a piece of regular Whisper White cardstock here. And in order to get the embossing powder to stick, especially if you don't have a stamp to use, we're going to create our own mixture using liquid glue and a little bit of water. You'll want to make sure that you protect your work surface. So I've got a small grid paper here, and I've got a clear block. So I'll move that paper off to the side so you can see a little bit better. I've got my multi-purpose liquid glue here, and I'm going to add about a drop of that here to the center of my clear block. I'll be using my aqua painter. Now this aqua painter is wonderful. It comes in a 2-pack. You simply unscrew it and you put tap water down inside. This eliminates the need for a cup and water. It's great obviously for watercoloring, but it's perfect for this technique. I'm going to squeeze 1 or 2 drops of water right here on the block, and I'm going to thin out that glue because I need this thin enough so that I can create the splatter. I'm going to move that block off to the side, and I've got my paper here where it's going to be protected over my work surface. Picking up that watered down glue, I'm loading up my brush. I'm going to hold it right over the paper, and I'm going to tap it against my finger on the opposite hand. Now you can't control this. It's going to go where it's going to go. So I'm just going to kind of gravitate and move that around. And then very quickly, I'm going to come in with my embossing powder once again, and I'm going to cover this very generously. So I'm going to work half at a time. You're going to notice too that I didn't use the embossing buddy, and you might be wondering why. Well, I'm actually after those little flecks, those specks. So any powder that stays behind just because of the static is completely fine with me. Once that's finished, we're going to go ahead and heat set this once again. Now, I want to give you a tip because these are small areas. You're going to need to take your time and work on one area at a time to make sure that that glue and water mixture dries before you move to the next section so that you don't lose your spot. The other thing is you're going to notice that this dries just a tad slower because this is a glue and water mixture. Now you might be wondering how you clean this up. I simply take it over to the sink and I use a regular mild dish soap to clean off my block as well as the bristles on my brush. You want to make sure you get all the glue out of here so that you can obviously use it with watercoloring again. Our next step is going to involve some strips that we're going to adhere to the outside edges here of this cardstock. I'm going to bring in my silicone craft sheet. I absolutely love this because liquid glue, hot glue, and even adhesive will not stick to it. It simply rubs right off, which is going to keep my work surface sticky free, especially when we are working with very thin pieces of cardstock. I'm going to lay this here on top of my silicone craft sheet. I'm going to add small dashes of adhesive all the way down. I'm going to bring my silicone craft sheet here underneath, and I'm going to work on an angle. Now, there's really no rhyme or reason to this. You're just going to kind of create an angle that's interesting to your eye. I'm going to slide that off up here to the side, and I'm going to do the same thing now with the mossy meadow by adding small strips of adhesive down that strip of paper. This now will get bordered on top of the cherry cobbler strip, and I'll press that in place. Now I'm going to rotate this. I'm going to do the exact same thing now here in this corner. These two corners do not have to match identically. So if you want one shallower or deeper than the other, that's totally fine. Because my last strip here was the Mossy Meadow, I'm going to choose to use the Cherry Cobbler first in this corner. I want my pattern to be alternating. And now I'll go ahead and do the same thing with the Mossy Meadow. I do recommend that you make these strips a lot longer than you need, simply because we can then create perfect edges on this, and that's easy to do. Flip the cardstock over, and with a pair of scissors, what we're going to do is we're going to use this paper as a guide to trim away what we don't need. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to cut right along the edge of that paper, and then I'll turn it and I'll do the same thing on this side, and I'll repeat that all the way around. What you'll want to make sure now that you do is come across the back and rub it in place, because you want to make sure that those edges are going to be good and stuck to this layer of cardstock. We're going to adhere this now to the card base. This is Mossy Meadow. I did score it in half right before you joined me. If you've watched my videos before, you know I'm a big fan of that bone folder for that nice crisp edge. With my fold at the top, I'm going to go ahead and adhere this here. I love to use that silicone craft sheet to make sure that my work surface stays clean. Now I'm going to add ample adhesive in the four corners of this layer. I'm going to adhere that now, leaving a small margin of the card base showing all the way around. My next step is going to be that greeting. So I'm going to flip that over, and I'll be using my full-size dimensionals. Now I'm very generous with these because I know my Christmas card is going to go in the mail, and the post office has a mail machine that has rollers in it. So I want to make sure that my card is going to look just like I created it when it's received on the other side. Then I'll use my Take Your Pick tool with the paper piercing tool attachment to go ahead and remove those paper backings. This now will get mounted here towards the bottom right side. And then remember our holly image? We're going to go ahead and add dimensionals to the back. This is one reason why using a good quality thick white paper is really important. The thick Whisper White cardstock is perfect for this. You want to make sure that your paper is strong enough and resilient enough to withstand the color of the alcohol markers while allowing you to blend it beautifully. And then this is going to go here off to the right side, and we'll just tack that in place. Here's the card we created together today. Here's the card I created before you joined me. A really fun splatter technique for that background, a great way to use up some empty space on your card, especially if you do not have a background stamp. If you have enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up here on YouTube, which is a like. It certainly helps. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.